worst lies ever forced on the American people. We've come to know it as the magic bullet theory.
Okay, welcome to another edition of On the Trail of Delusion, where I try to separate the wheat from the chaff and actually give you something substantial on the JFK assassination rather than some of the usual nonsense you'll find all over YouTube. So welcome. Tonight we have a panel discussion on the single bullet theory, one of the most controversial parts of the JFK assassination, and I'm joined by a very distinguished panel. And so let's go around and introduce yourselves. We'll start with Martin.
Yeah, I'm Martin Kelly. I'm a retired professor, and I like the single bullet theory very much and can talk about it.
Okay, Nick.
Yeah, my name is Nicholas Nalli, and I'm a imagery scientist for the Department of War. This is a case that interests me. I hope to bring expertise in the realm of physics to the discussion. I have to make sure I put out the disclaimer that, I introduced myself, as a scientist. I am employed, but everything that I say tonight is totally my own opinions, my own findings, my own. It's only me. I do not represent the government whatsoever in any discussion tonight.
And just as I do not represent Langley either.
I would not confirm nor deny.
Say that.
Okay, so look, the single bullet theory, you've got Mark Lane, who perhaps was the one who coined the term the magic bullet theory. You've got Raymond Marcus, who wrote the book The Bastard Bullet. If you read that tome, he basically makes the case that this bullet doesn't fit, it doesn't make sense, it's unscathed. How did it come out? Who found it? What didn't look like that? It must have been planted. And yet, when you actually look at the science of the single bullet theory, kind of fits. So who wants to start off talking about the single bullet theory?
I can make an opening statement.
Sure.
So the question that I find myself asking is, why are we at this particular disposition as opposed to another where most people who are familiar with this case, whether your familiarity is a low, minuscule level, or if you're like someone who has a vast knowledge on this case, everyone involved, everyone who has some familiar in this case, we are part of one huge group. And of that group, the vast majority of the group feel that the single bullet theory is a fabricated concoction that was devised in order to account for something that they believe didn't happen. And I think that there could be some blame placed here. Naturally, you want to go directly to the conspiracists, but I think the Warren Commission could actually bear some of the blame. I think they could have mitigated some of the critics just by giving us some basic things. Like when you look at the Warren Commission report and the exhibits in the report, and you see pictures, and you'll see the bullet that was shot through the goat carcass that is utterly destroyed. And then you see 399 compared to it. On its face, when someone says, hey, this bullet caused all this damage, went through two men, broke two bones, made 7 wounds, and came out in relatively good condition, whereas this other bullet, it just hit one goat rib, which is smaller than Connolly's rib, and it's utterly destroyed. So on its face, when you look at that, it's like, well, that seems to kind of make that. Well, I thought it made sense. And I think that what could have been done was, when they did the investigation, rather than, because I know that there was a rush to put out a report. I know that there was some public perception issue that they were concerned with. And, this is the height of the Cold War. They were concerned about that. But I think there's other perceptions they should have considered more strongly, like, what if people believe the government did it and they're covering it up? I think that's just as dangerous as the perception of Russia could have done it, in my opinion. So I think that they could have done some things to mitigate the perception on the single bullet theory. And they could have made it so that it could be believable by more people just by giving us some basic principles in physics. I mean, just real basic stuff that you can apply, and you can know that a bullet that has gone through soft tissue and has decreased in its velocity is not going to encounter as much force in order to be damaged. Whereas the other bullet that they're using, that's in the Warren Commission report of the goat's rib that was struck, that is destroyed, it was going nearly muzzle velocity. So if they could have provided us just with a little bit of that, and even show maybe some experimentation, like they did show some experimentation, but maybe just a little bit more, and maybe show a bullet going through a 20% gel block, and then a smaller gel block representing Kennedy's neck and a portion of the lat muscle in Kennedy's back, and then striking the rib. How about showing that bullet compared to 399, rather than showing a bullet that has experienced maximum force, almost muzzle velocity, directly into a goat's rib? I think that there could have been some mitigation there, and I had to put some blame toward the Warren Commission for that. However, I do direct most of my blame to conspiracies. Well, not any conspiracies, some of them. I think that they were able to, like, for instance, I think Sarah Weck, no denigration to his character or anything like that. We're just talking about the case. And I know he's passed on, and I respect him as a professional. But concerning this case, I don't think that he has been the most forthright, I should put it. He, I think, exploited the ignorance that the Warren Commission could have given us a little bit more information, and we didn't have that. And I totally believe people like Weck, who is a well-respected, highly professional, very credentialed, professionally trained forensic pathologist. When he speaks with his, he's very eloquent in his speech. He's a showman. He's very charismatic, very entertaining. When you listen to him, and you're a layman, and you hear him talk about how this bullet that went through a goat's rib is utterly destroyed, and this 399 is in almost pristine condition. I mean, we don't have you have little of a chance. I mean, you're almost got to believe the guy. I mean, he's a pathologist, right? I mean, he's well respected, world known in all of these things. So my bigger blame goes to the critics who exploited our ignorance as far as the physical parts are concerned, you know, with drag force being related to velocity, being related to the damage. If most people had a little bit of information like that, they would be able to refute some of the claims that you get from the experts who, as I can see, purposely use these tactics of deception against us.
I really agree with you. I mean, had the Warren Commission put together a panel of 10 forensic pathologists to examine the autopsy X-rays and photos back in 1964, there would have been no misinterpretation of where the wounds were. And had they done a proper analysis of the Zapruder film back then, they would have noticed the JFK's head moving forward at 312, 313.
Yeah, I'm gonna chime in a little bit here, just going from my experience. I don't fault the Warren Commission quite as much, although there are things that they could have done better. But without getting into what I think they could have done better, when I read the Warren Commission report, that's when my mind was changed. And this is going way back. And this is before I got into graduate school and got heavy duty into science and stuff like that. I just read it from cover to cover in response to the JFK movie. It was being sold in bookstores, and for cheap, I bought it just to see how bad it would be. And then as I'm reading it, I realize, what? that movie lied to me because it made it seem like the Warren Commission wasn't addressing certain things when in fact it was all being well addressed within that book. Within the first couple of pages, I think they talked about how the parade route changed, and they addressed why that was. No, not that it changed, but why they took that turn that they did. Because in the movie JFK, it did seem like, well, why did they do that? So that was all explained. So now getting back to the single bullet theory, I remember seeing the photos of the damaged bullets and thinking, well, they look pretty. They don't look like the bullet that they found. But from my perspective, I thought, but it doesn't matter really because everything else is pretty well explained. So it just happened that this is what happened. This bullet turned out to not be very well damaged, and sometimes that can happen. So now, subsequent to that, now as a scientist who's been, one thing about the science that I do is it's not laboratory based. I'm not a laboratory physicist. I'm someone who goes out in the field. So, and atmospheric science in particular is notorious for this type of thing where events are macro scale events, and they're very, very complex, and they're never repeated. So that's why hurricanes, for example, are given names, because each hurricane is unique and different, does different things. Even though there's a model for hurricanes, even though there's a standard sort of physical dynamical model that explains the underlying mechanics and principles of what causes one, each one is unique and different. So the same sort of thing happens here. So now when we look at like the single bullet theory, it is very much like that. It will never happen again. You cannot repeat that. There's no way you can perfectly repeat it. The best you'll get is what the Discovery Channel did, and that was pretty darn good. As far as I'm concerned, what the Discovery Channel did was a validation of the single bullet theory because it was close. But was it perfect? No. And nothing's going to be perfect. The only way you'll get a perfect reproduction of what happened will be to get a time machine and go back and set everything back up exactly as it was, where you have the same men, the same geometries, the same speeds, the same wind speed, the same, same weather conditions, the same shooter. Everything has to be exactly the same for that thing to happen again, exactly like that. So, just going back to when I read the Warren Commission report, it seemed odd, but that's because it is kind of odd. But everyday life is odd, and we encounter odd things all the time in our everyday lives.
Yeah, and it's very true. So what is, I mean, it again, it sort of makes sense, but why is it that conspiracy theorists just can't seem to come to grips with this theory after all these years?
Because it's not what they want to believe.
Right.
If the single bullet theory was the actual explanation for what happened, then there goes the whole conspiracy right there, right? Because a big portion of the conspiracy relies on there being multiple shooters in the plaza. And it's not to say that if there was only one shooter, there couldn't have been a conspiracy. There could have been, but that conspiracy is far less attractive than one that features multiple shooters. Just to piggyback a little bit on what Nick was just saying, in 1964, options for proxies for testing purposes were relatively limited. Like, I don't believe they had ballistics gel in 1964, right? So you had to use things like animal cadavers and stuff like that. You could make a conspiracy to assassinate the president, but you can't make a conspiracy in reality that would be that elaborate, where okay, the recovered projectile is going to look like this. This is where, when, and how it will be recovered. Like, no conspiracy, regardless of how omnipresent or omniscient it may be, could have ever planned for that. Once you pull the trigger and you send the projectile down the barrel and out the muzzle, you've effectively lost control of it, right? Like, there's no telling the exact way it's going to pass through these targets, what bones it's going to hit, what bones it's going to narrowly miss, how it's going to be recovered, where it's going to be recovered. Like, it doesn't make sense for them to have a person at Parkland Hospital Like, I mean, how do you even know for sure the president's going to end up at Parkland Hospital? What if they end up taking him to another hospital? Like, do you have multiple people at multiple hospitals with fake bullets ready to plant them just in case he goes somewhere else? And it's like, how do you know you're going to get the opportunity to plant a bullet unseen? And I mean, there's all kinds of variables here that no conspiracy could have ever predicted for. Like, what if you plant CE 399 on the stretcher in the corridor of the hospital, and then later on during Governor Connolly's surgery, a piece of lead too large to have originated from CE 399 comes out of his lung? What if during the autopsy of President Kennedy, a fully intact projectile is recovered from his body? How are you going to explain it then? Now you've exposed the conspiracy by planting that bullet. And if you're going to plant that bullet, why not plant one that looks totally mangled? Like, why would you plant one that has relatively little damage that arouses people's suspicions, you know? I mean, just a bit of a digression. It's kind of like having the conspiracy murder Lee Harvey Oswald on national TV. Like, if you're going to murder this guy, why don't you just have another inmate shank him to death in the shower or something like that? Like, why would you send a guy in to murder him on national television in front of millions of people? It's just these types of conspiratorial thinking. It's all post hoc, after the fact thinking, because now they have all the information, and using all of that information, they can craft a conspiracy theory that fits those things. But if you actually were the conspiracy at the time, you wouldn't have been able to do that in advance. And I think the single bullet theory is like a perfect example of that. There's no way a conspiracy could have planned for this. It's just not possible.
I mean, I have to laugh. I did a post yesterday about the movie Executive Action. And in that movie, the assassins are actually practicing because they have to get the shooting down to 5.6 seconds. Well, why would the assassins train to do 5.6 seconds? Did they see the Zapruder film before the assassination?
Yeah, they time travel, Fred. They
You know,
time.
I mean, it's
How
just
would they know Zapruder was going to be there, right?
yeah,
Or that anybody would be there filming it?
you
That's a
know,
good movie,
Can
though.
I
I do like that movie.
It's funny. That movie is funny.
It is.
It's like a tongue-in-cheek film, even though it's serious.
yeah, yeah.
can
Well,
I expound on
yeah,
the idea of repeating? I mean, that has come up a couple of times, like repeating scenario and trying to duplicate what happened. I know, Martin, you haven't had an opportunity to speak yet, so if you want to speak now, go ahead. But I would like to address how it would be unfeasible to be able to repeat the shooting scenario that we had in Dealey Plaza.
Well, the only thing I would say is that on your original point, Fred, if you look at the Warren Commission, what you have is the report, and then of course you have the supporting testimony and analyses that come up in the testimony in the other volumes. And if you look at the report, you get very, very economical glosses of rather complicated points. And that was just their style. And so you're going to lose a lot of information and simply say things like the committee believed that one bullet did all the damage without any physical explication at all. And that's what you get. If you go to the testimony, the most, I think, important testimony for the single bullet, it's the questioning of both Dr. Shaw and Dr. Gregory by Arlen Specter. And there are two such testimonies of each man, once in Washington and once in Dallas. And in there, the physical elements that are necessary for a physicist to put this together in some way are in the testimony by the kinds of questions that Specter is asking. He asks about diminishing velocity. He talks about a bullet which goes in sideways as opposed to nose first. What they needed to do is to have somebody write a better report and put this stuff together in certain ways. Because even in that testimony, you've got Shaw, who did more to muddy up this case, by the way, than anybody else at the level of expertise, because he kept insisting that the bullet could have been an off-center shot, which is not true. I mean, it simply isn't true. But he's the one who describes in the testimony that the bullet did not hit the rib nose on. And so it's very important. And none of that's mentioned in the report, so nobody knows anything about it. You don't think that a lot of these conspiracy people read the testimony. They read the report, and then they were able to. I mean, I remember Mark Lane one time at one of these conferences saying that he was the first one in line when the government printing office opened its door with the Warren report. And this was like, in the 1990s. And I'm saying to myself, and he hasn't read it yet, I mean, it's unbelievable. So I think that they did drop the ball in the way you suggested by not putting it together in a conceptual way that would have been effective and had some causal elements in it. Yeah.
Yeah, Fred, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to go back just a little bit because Nick mentioned it and Scott talked about it a little bit about whether or not a scenario like this, a shooting scenario like this, could be duplicated. And I would have to tell you, Scott, that in Edgewood Arsenal in Maryland in '64, they did have 20% ballistic gel blocks, and that they used back then in 1964. We're into like whether or not, because you hear often people complain that no one's ever been able to duplicate it correctly and has never been done. What they're not realizing, the people who have that criticism, they're not realizing that this scenario, or even any shooting scenario, cannot be exactly duplicated due to unpredictable variables that you could never come up with. Like when a bullet comes out of a barrel, any bullet, even a stable bullet like the 6.5 millimeter bullet we're talking about today, it doesn't come out exactly straight. There's going to be some kind of yaw. This particular bullet has very little yaw. It's usually below 2 degrees. Sometimes it's even lower than that. But 2 degrees is never above 2 degrees that they've been able to find. But anyway, there's still some degree of yaw, and I'm going to bring out my little mock 399 that I did in my garage a little while ago. It kind of looks like a cigar, but let's try to imagine that it's a bullet. It's just a little piece of wood that I painted a copper. When that bullet comes out of that barrel, gases come ahead of the bullet, and when that happens, it gives the bullet what they describe as an epicyclic motion.
That's right.
Which means
Yeah.
it means that the bullet is circling very small. I mean, of course, I'm exaggerating so you can see it, but it's also doing mini circles as it's circling while it's moving. And when the bullet hits an object, there's no way to predict where that bullet is in that circling. So depending on where the yaw is, where the tilt is, will have influence on what that bullet hits. It may cause the bullet to slightly bend down going through a material, or slightly up, slightly left, slightly right. There's no way to predict it. Now, that's just one stage of unpredictability, because we have like several stages with this case of this bullet passing through multiple or two people. Each time it passes through, the variations compound, because now after it's leaving Kennedy's neck, it's going into yaw. And as it does that, it could have yawed upward. It could have yawed downward. It could have yawed left. It could have yawed right. There's no way to predict it. When it hit Connolly, there's no way to predict what kind of curvature within ballistic tolerances it would have taken, because there's no absolute straight lines when bullets go through people. There's always some form of deflection. Sometimes it's very minute and looks like a straight line, but it's usually, almost in all cases, there's going to be some kind of curvature. And there's just no way to predict that. So when people say they can never reproduce it, in their minds, they're thinking it can't be reproduced because it's impossibility to begin with. That's not true. It's impossible to reproduce because there are variables in terms of the bullet's yaw and the bullet's epicyclic movement that cannot be predicted when it hits a target.
That's true. And I think one of the things that conspiracy theorists miss is that when you do a simulation, a recreation of any of this. It doesn't have to be exact. It's a measure. Are you close enough that this is possible? So when you
Yeah.
measure, could Oswald have made it from his rooming house to the scene of the Tippett murder? Well, we don't know how fast he walked. We don't know his route. So the question is it possible that he could have made it? And you do it yourself and you see, yeah, it's quite possible. Could
Yeah.
Oswald have gone down the stairs in 90 seconds from the sixth floor to the lunchroom? Well, we don't know how fast he went, but is it possible? And the answer is yes. And the same thing here with the Discovery Channel was it showed that doing the best they could, it was quite close.
Yeah. No, good point.
So going back to the single bullet theory, I mean, by the way, the Edgewood Arsenal report, I mean, there's a lot of detail. The doctors who did a lot of those testing, I mean, they testified that the bullet, they said it was tumbling, and they explained a lot of this. But like you say, Martin, people don't really read the testimony.
We're all kind of talking about the same basic thing here. One of the things is it's just a very complicated event that happened, and it has to do with all these things that we were talking about. FJ is talking about the slight yaw and tumbling of a bullet coming out of a rifle. It can be the same rifle, but each bullet is a little bit different, and that's going to create different outcomes. There's also things, as I already mentioned, in Dealey Plaza, there was a wind, and there's turbulence in the wind. The wind is not just coming one direction; it's kind of moving back and forth randomly. So there's all these different factors that come into play that complicate this. And what I'm getting at here is I do try always to have a bit of empathy for an honest person's questions. So I have empathy for the original, let's say, critics. Like Fred, you were originally a critic, I think, right?
Yep.
So, going back then, these could have been sort of honest questions. Looking at the bullet condition and the fact that it created all that damage, so to speak, just seems sort of incredulous. And a good student would ask, well, does that make sense? How could that be? I empathize with that point of view. And I also have to say here that classical physics, I've said this to Fred, is no cakewalk. It can get extremely complicated extremely fast. And the reason has to do with the fact that in the macro scale, things are get much more complicated. You're not just dealing with just some atoms. Now, don't get me wrong, quantum mechanics is hard, and I'm not saying that it's not, okay? But it's just that we don't use quantum mechanics to forecast weather. We don't use that, even though weather is made up of atoms, even though the atmosphere is made up of atoms. We do not use quantum mechanics because you can't do it that way. So instead we use classical mechanics, but the fact is it's because it's so complex that classical mechanics already is very difficult. It gets very, very difficult to explain it exactly, the phenomenon itself. So the same goes with the single bullet theory. What happened was an extremely complicated event, and there's some non-intuitive physics going on there. You can get a good professor, like, let's say Professor Feynman comes in, and he can explain it really well and make it sort of transparent somewhat. But ultimately, this can be very difficult stuff to truly, totally understand, and it takes a little bit of humility to realize that maybe I'm wrong about it. Maybe the professor knows what they're talking about. Certainly, they're providing a rational explanation that is plausible and makes sense.
I would add, one thing to that when I was on the fence, what really, really helped me accept the single bullet theory was when I saw the HSCA trajectory diagrams for the first time. I was actually quite shocked. I had never seen diagrams like that. I was used to seeing the Robert Groden connect the dots
Yeah. Yeah.
diagram. I thought that's the way it was. And then all of a sudden you see
Cartoon
these
version,
professionally drawn diagrams and it fits perfectly. It was quite a shock.
I think Larry Sturtevant's book,
Yes.
The JFK Myths, is what turned me around finally. because I was hung up myself. There you go. I got my
Yeah.
copy here too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is great. This is
I,
great.
I was hung up on the condition of the bullet. I didn't understand those stresses that are involved when bullets are at different speed. They undergo different levels of stress. Some levels of stress high enough to damage the bullet, and slower velocity, which means a slower level of stress, doesn't damage the bullet, but it can still damage bone. Once I got that, everything started. I started to be able to be skeptical of a lot of other things after that.
That's a key point, isn't it?
So, Martin, tell us a bit about, I mean, for instance, why was the bullet hole so low on Kennedy's jacket and shirt?
Well, it was folded. Yeah, it was bunched up, right?
It was, well,
I mean, how many
what
times
the-
have we argued that with people? You show them a picture, and they send you back a blurred picture. It says, "Well, look, it's not bunched up," you know. So I don't know.
Or they'll have the excuse that he only wore tailored shirts, and so his shirt wasn't bunched up. So why is the bullet hole so low on the shirt? And then what do you do? Like, there's only one hole through each garment.
Yeah.
So if that hole wasn't where the jacket was, then how did that hole get in the shirt?
And we have the autopsy photograph that shows us exactly where the entrance wound is. So we know where the entrance wound is. It's not a mystery like it used to be.
Yeah.
But why, this is what mystifies me is why won't people accept that? I mean, it's just so.
Well, because it got muddied. It got muddied up. I mean, you had Dr. Berkeley saying in the cover sheet that the wound was at T3. And he's a conspiracy theorist, and he's got an official foot in the door there. So you have people arguing, what's a T3? Well, it's not a T3. I mean, you could read just the HSCA discussion, which is a long discussion on where this wound is. I mean, really, and they are being very conservative by saying could be as low as T1, but not really. T6, and his elbows go up. I mean, that's a causal feature in the sequence. Latimer first noticed that. When his elbows go up and you look through the whole array of those nerves, it's at C6 that the elbows go up, and that's really causal. You can't argue
Latimer.
with it. Yeah, it's in there.
Nice.
And the same way with Conley holding his hat. If you go to Shaw's report of the damage to his nerves, Wecht said, well, he's still holding his hat. He couldn't be hit that way, still hold his hat. But in fact, the nerve that keeps the thumb in place was not damaged. But the nerve that allows it to flex was damaged. So it was locked on there. It's right in the report. He can't let go of his hat. Why did he still hold on to it? He couldn't let go of it,
And
Martin,
Nellie Connolly said that he held the hat all the way to the hospital.
All the way. She said that in 96, so you can get attacked on that. Okay.
Yeah.
They got to her. They got to her, after 30 years. Okay. So, I mean, I'm looking at things that where you make an argument here, this argument has causal features. It's like, this happened, and therefore X must have happened. Okay. Could not have not happened. So that's the deal with me on this. So.
Just a little bit more on the holding of the hat. If you look a little bit further along, maybe in the 270s, or I'm sorry, the 270s, like 278, somewhere around in there, you can see Connolly holding the hat with his fingers like this, holding the hat. His hand is kind of close to his chest. So his thumb really doesn't even have to have anything to do with it.
Yeah.
His fingers are just like curled like this.
That's interesting. I didn't notice that. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I've posted it a few times.
But when his hat goes up in 227 and so forth, his hat goes up like this. It's in the vertical orientation, so his thumb must be holding it.
Well, yeah. I mean,
So
I don't
so
think
at some
I
point
don't believe the criticism. I'm just saying that.
No,
I'm just saying that there's
saying,
no reason why he wouldn't be able to hold his hat.
Yeah, the sequence is interesting though. He must have been holding it with his thumb, and then of course he's still holding it with his fingers later on. That's rather interesting. I didn't realize that.
I'll send you a picture.
Yeah, that'd be. Yes. What about the movement of Connolly's coat, the lapel move?
Yeah.
Doesn't that tell us something?
Well, David Rowan is just, he's a professor. He was a professor. And he says it was the wind. I heard him say it. The wind blew it, okay?
Yeah.
And it blew it in a direction that's odd. It was blowing in a direction that was different from the way it was blowing the flag on the front right fender. So this was the magic wind.
The wind singled out Connolly and blew nobody else.
That's right. This is a selective wind.
The magic wind theory.
We
Yeah,
could have
that's
Nick analyze the turbulence in this wind.
Nick, would
yeah.
you agree?
So go ahead. Go ahead.
I was saying that the lapel bunching out, would you agree that that would have been caused by the velocity of the cavity that happens when you see like going through ballistic gel, when that cavity opens up and there's like a lot of pressure, that radial velocity? Do you think that would have been the cause for the lapel jump?
Yeah, absolutely. And no, you had the Latimer book there. Latimer performed these experiments, and he did a lot of stuff. This guy, he had experiments that showed he had mock up a man with a jacket on, go figure, a suit coat on, and he had his Carcano rifle, and he fired it through like a goat or something, or a cow or something body with a suit jacket on, and it pops out, and it has to do with that. Yeah, it has to do with there's the temporary cavitation effect, and then on exit that comes out, this pressure wave comes out with the bullet on exit, and a lot of material comes out as well. There's mass that comes out, blood or whatever, and that creates that force. So just do that. And he had a black coat on, and it contrasted with, or a dark coat. I don't know if it was black. I don't know what the exact color was, but it was dark in contrast to his white shirt. And so that made it very noticeable in the Zapruder film. I say very noticeable, not really very noticeable. It took time to see it, but once you know it's there, it's very noticeable.
You know the story that this was noticed in mid-1970s, and that Wecht knew about it, and he told the person who discovered it not to let it free. There's a letter I got from Joel Grant years ago with that, and Gerald Posner, in fact, threatened Wecht with that letter on TV when he was arguing with him, and Wecht was very upset about that. But it had been discovered earlier on. I had a quick physics question. If there were no explosion out of the hole, but just the bullet went out and went through the coat, there'd be some force out on the coat, wouldn't there? Even though it's very short-lived. Because when I studied the film, I noticed a slight opening of the jacket at 223 before the lapel goes anywhere, and then 224 the lapel occludes the white collar, and then you see it for sure. And so I always wondered what was happening there. But the biggest force is, in fact, the gases coming out in the exit wound, right? That's a bigger force.
No, I'm not sure.
I mean, for moving the jacket,
Not positive, but I think that factors in. But I should step back a little bit. I'm not really totally positive. Definitely, another thing is that as we've been discussing, is the bullet came out of Governor Connolly at an oblique angle, right? It comes out and it begins to tumble. And that, I think that begins as soon as it exits. I think the tumbling effect happens once it goes from the dense tissue.
It goes into a less
so it starts to go into its. Actually, do we know does anybody know? This is where. Does anybody know what the exit hole looked like? It was small still.
In the jacket, the bullet hole.
Okay.
But you can't tell because all these bullet holes are frazzled. They're all ripped up some, so it's hard to tell exactly how small they are.
I'm sorry. Let's say what
went in the wrist backwards.
What was the exit? What was the exit wound? The exit wound like? Forget the jacket. What was it?
Was a few centimeters.
It was a pretty large exit wound.
Yeah, it's a large exit wound.
That's it. So that would have been the presented area of the bullet. coming out, and so that creates much more
Yeah.
force against if it's going to hit fabric than
Yeah.
let's say
Yeah.
when it
Yeah.
hit head on. Because I'm just trying to think if you had if you had a suit coat and you just fired the rifle straight at it with nothing in between, obviously it would pass through very easily and probably wouldn't see any motion from the coat. It would just
Yeah.
go straight through. So I think so for the bullet to have any force, I think it has to do with it being sort of at a tumbling state.
Yeah. Yeah.
That'll create more presented area, which will create a greater force, impulse force.
Scott, have you debated this at all online with people? The single bullet theory.
Oh yeah, I've had many debates online regarding the single bullet theory, and all the things we're discussing here have been brought up at one time or another. I mean, I recall hearing people make that argument that a gust of wind is responsible for the flapping of Connolly's jacket. But I mean, it's just like, did a gust of wind coincidentally come by at that exact moment to cause that observed motion of his jacket? I mean, you have conspiracy theorists, and conspiracy theorists sometimes accuse us load nutters of being coincidence theorists.
Yeah.
But I'd say like that's a pretty big coincidence to believe in. I mean, it's interesting arguing about the single bullet theory because every little thing will be brought up for dispute in that discussion. And it's all because it ties the JFK assassination is but one component of a larger worldview. So these people are ready to go to the mat to defend their objections to the single bullet theory. Because if the single bullet theory is correct, then the chances of the JFK assassination having been a conspiracy are much less. And if that's true, then their entire worldview is wrong. So it's understandable why they're so eager to argue against it, you know?
Yeah, if there's a psychology involved in that, and there's a bias because I know this really well because I was in that position. And when all these things, when I started to deconstruct these things, I went through a little bit of a stress period, and it took a little while to like be able to come back. And then the way I remedied the way I felt about it, the way my own therapy was to go on the attack of all the conspiracy stuff. So that's kind of how I dealt with my embarrassment of being bamboozled by all these conspiracy claims over the years.
But that's 95% of us, right? We all
Yeah.
we all were duped by this, and now
Yep.
we're beating ourselves to death by beating up people who are like we were when we no longer are. We're better now than we used to be, and we keep reminding ourselves of that. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
we were all there at one point.
That's right.
It's the sunk cost fallacy. You've invested so much time, so much energy, so much effort in advancing this view. It's like a ship going along on the water. You can't just immediately slam it into reverse. You kind of have to slow down and then turn around and go back the other way.
Well, that's cognitive dissonance theory is part of it. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
definitely.
one of the things that really got me was the fact that Cyril Wecht would do these demonstrations that were really patently false
Yeah.
in the way he put it all together, and he certainly must have known better. The positioning of the chairs. I mean, he would do this over and over and over again, and it was really quite shocking.
It's hard to tell whether he knew or not, because he was such an hysteric. Because I talked with him a number of times, and I knew people who knew him very well when I talked with Baden and Lowell Levine about him, and they thought he was very good, except on this case. That was their words.
I think he knew it. If
You
you
do?
if you listen to his HSCA testimony, toward the end, Purdy started to question him about velocities and all those things, and he kept saying something to the effect of, "I can't answer that. I would be speculating." But he knows. So I think he's known at least since the 70s.
Okay. All right. All right.
And the other thing that really amazes me is you had on the one hand Latimer, who went out and did all these tests, and Wecht, who certainly could have raised lots of money, never did any testing.
No, no.
I mean, not once. I mean, that says a lot about him.
Well, he was brought up in charges. He was making appearances. Even before he became famous, he was getting a couple $1,000s to give lectures.
Yeah,
And
well,
he
and
was
and the and he did get famous, right?
he
So
got famous. Yeah, yeah.
as compared to the other pathologists, right? I mean, there was all these other pathologists who were equally qualified as him. I don't think he was I don't think he was the lord of the Nazgul here, and like he was
And
the best one of all of them. I think that they're all pretty well qualified, and
and
yet
you know
they're
that
not.
you know that that Wecht went into business with Baden together afterwards.
With
So
whom?
Wecht and Baden had a consulting company together.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So
Yeah.
when I was living in Singapore, there was a case of a maid, a Filipino maid who had been thrown out of window,
Oh,
and the Singapore government hired Wecht and Baden to come in and oversee the autopsy. And they were a team, and would work on as a team on a variety of these sort of famous cases all over the place.
when was this, Fred?
This was in around 1996.
Really?
Yep.
Wow.
So
Yeah,
I,
I've I've seen Wecht in a lot of other contexts. He was involved in the John Benet Ramsey case. Wasn't it Wecht who testified in the O.J. Simpson case too, Fred?
I think that was Baden.
Oh, okay, that was Baden. But I've seen Wecht make comments about a lot of different cases over the years. So yeah, he's definitely made a career for himself out of this. And
He
I mean,
showed up in the goat farmers murder case in New York. He showed.
okay.
Yeah, he
I
was.
mean, it's hard to just dismiss him outright because he is a recognized expert in this field. But when you look at the HSCA's forensic pathology panel, he was the one dissenting opinion on that panel.
Yeah, yeah.
Like his peers in his discipline do not agree with his conclusions. So,
He was
what
complete.
does that say?
okay. One final question. What do you guys think of? Have you seen the Knott Laboratories recreation of the single bullet theory? That was done. I think John Orr was the one who started that, and he got
Right.
Knott Laboratories to do a recreation.
It
And
looks like they're trying to answer Dale Myers' simulation. Is that right? Is what
exactly,
it looks
yes,
like?
yeah, they did their own little animation, but not quite,
Yeah,
not anywhere near like Dale Myers.
yeah. So without me knowing, without me being able to really study, I've seen the bits and pieces of it, and it looks bad. One thing that they don't realize with Dale Myers now, in some ways, I wish Dale Myers would just come out and publish everything, put his code out there, whatever the code it was he used, and the data and everything else, and just put it out there open, so that it's all out in the open, so somebody like me can pick it up and duplicate things. So there's a little bit of a black box underneath, but I do understand the basics and the gist of what he did. And it has to do with the fact that he didn't just use the Zapruder film. He combines the Zapruder film with other information. What is some of that information? Well, it's the detailed dimensions of Dealey Plaza, the relevant parts of Dealey Plaza, the road, the depository, and other things that go into his model. So he can use that. And then another thing that he did is he had sort of mock-up modeled bodies that went into the car, three-dimensionality. So he was able to bring a modeled three-dimensional body into the car itself. And with all that put together, then he used the Zapruder film to provide the time dimension. So he had basically the space dimensions all modeled out before the Zapruder film, without the Zapruder film. Then the Zapruder film was brought in to bring in the time dimension, and then that's how he was able to then have a full 4D model, basically, where he could look anywhere. And on that, the Beyond Conspiracy is really amazing how they panned around to one of the other camera angles. Was it much more? Or,
The Nix
I think,
film?
yeah, I don't, yeah, it might have been Nix or it might have been much more. He goes from Zapruder's position to another camera angle position. It looks perfect, right? So I'm just putting it out there that they don't realize that what he did was a very rigorous way of doing this. This is the way how you would have to do it, because the Zapruder film is limited information. It's just a two-dimensional frame by frame. So it gives you a lot of information in 2 dimensions and then also the time dimension. But he took all this other information and brought it in, and then that creates this 4D model. I don't think that's what this Knott laboratory did. I doubt it very highly.
How does their film differ? Does it differ from Meyer's film at all? Or?
Well, I think where they really made a mistake was in their positioning of Connolly. And so by not positioning Connolly correctly, they make the claim that the bullet would, the bullet just didn't line up, but it still came
Oh,
close.
I guess I've seen this. I've seen it. This has been on Facebook, right?
I think
That's right.
everybody's seen it.
Yeah. I mean, they forgot to turn Conley.
That's
Is
right.
this
They
the guy
didn't turn
that didn't
Connolly.
Conley? You know,
Yeah.
it's ridiculous. He testifies he was turned. I mean, my goodness.
And then there's one other thing I'm going to point out too is one thing that they look like they did, because it's newer, is looks like they put on a little bit more sophisticated skins onto the models. What would you call it? Like any let's say computer game that's a 3D first person shooter type of thing is, I think made with vector graphics and their wireframes, and then they put skins over top of the wireframes. And so Dale Meyer's model was done in, I think, the late 90s. And then things are a little bit more primitive in terms of the skins. So when you look at his model now, it looks a little bit more like primitive maybe, but that's only because it's the skins. And literally we're talking about, it's very superficial. It's just making the actual model, the modeled bodies themselves look kind of realistic, but not as, so it looks like this new Knott laboratory model, looks like they're trying to make the skins look a little more realistic. And then that's supposed to make it more realistic, but it doesn't. That's just the superficial part of it.
With the Dale Meyer's representation, there's a critique on it that I want to address that I think can be dispelled. Someone, I think possibly Robin Harris, there's a scene in Dale Meyer's reproduction that shows the camera going around the limousine. And when you do that, things are in different perspective. Like Kennedy is closer to you, and then it keeps turning, and then Connolly's closer to you. If it's not Robin Harris, I apologize, but I believe it was him. He took a clip that placed when the camera was going around. He selected the picture where Connolly is where Kennedy is a lot larger because of the perspective, and just froze it right there, and then did the trajectory through it, and it didn't match. So it was a dishonest thing that I just wanted to just kind of share here for those who may have been watching and saw what he did.
Yeah, well, the other thing was the Knott laboratory. The president of Knott Labs did a video with Jefferson Morley, and it was clear that, well, first off, they never really finished all of their work on the single bullet theory. They ran out of money, and the president really doesn't know that much about the case. And it was it was such a bad interview. Morley was shocked because he actually said that there's no way there could have been a shot from the grassy knoll. The trajectory doesn't work from the grassy knoll. And I don't know whether he knew his stuff or not, but Morley was absolutely flabbergasted. What are you saying? Are you saying there was no shot from the grassy knoll? And he said, yeah, it doesn't work. But it was quite funny to see Morley's reaction to that.
He doesn't know anything about the case.
No, and so the Knott Labs is just an unfinished piece of work. And it's funny when you looked at Oliver Stone's documentary series JFK Revisited, when they do they don't really do the single bullet theory, but they show the trajectory of the shot. And what's amazing is that, well, of course they have to show that it doesn't work, but it's so close. It's like, hold it, you're getting there so close that maybe it works. It's a slight adjustment, and you're there.
Does the Knott Lab have Connolly getting hit with a separate bullet?
It just tries to show you that Connolly's position after it exits Kennedy would not hit him on the right side of under the armpit. It just wouldn't work. and they try to show that Connolly would have had to be seated differently for it to have worked.
So by implication, then he must have been hit with another bullet, according to the study.
Yeah, they don't really say that, and of course they're not going to go there. They're just going to
Yeah.
say this doesn't work,
Yeah.
and leave it at that.
No, they need to explain where the other bullet came from.
That's right.
It's also impossible.
Exactly right.
Well, yeah, that's a very good point.
It's not possible for another shot. I mean, that's what the conspiracy people don't understand. They keep arguing that it was a bullet that went in at an angle, so therefore it didn't go through Kennedy and start to tumble, but it went in at an angle and made a wider wound that way. I mean, number one is that through skin you can't get a wider wound that way, but number two is this wound is described as vertically elongated by Dr. Shaw. So the shooter was either in a cloud or in Kennedy's back pocket, to get an elongated wound by an off-center shot that way, and it would never come out in the front of his body. So there is no scenario for an off-center shot going into his back. It had to go through Kennedy because of any other shot wouldn't have come out his chest. Wouldn't have.
I have to.
Go ahead.
I got to piggyback you on that one, Martin. Dr. Robert Shaw, he described the back wound to Connolly as being the length was twice the diameter.
Yeah, 15.
And Larry,
15 millimeters. Yeah.
Larry Sturtevant explained that if it was a tangential shot, as some have claimed, the shot would have had to come in at a 30-degree angle to his flesh. So if Connolly's sitting, let's say fairly 90 degrees, the bullet would have to come in this angle in order to make a wound.
Yeah.
And then
I calculated it to be more than 30 degrees, but I'll accept that.
And if you're going to have that, then you're also going to have a directional entry wound. You're going to be able to, the wound is going to show which direction it came from. And then following that, you're going to have the wound track in that same direction. So if the bullet is coming out of below Connolly's nipple, then it's not going to, it just doesn't make any sense.
No, of course not. No, it would come out either below his waist somewhere or come out his head, given that line. But listen, if you look at the forensics of it, I can't find anywhere in the literature where bullets going through skin off angle produce elongated wounds. They produce a slightly ovoid wound, but it's the nose of the bullet that opens the hole, no matter what orientation the bullet hits the skin. And on the shallow angle side, you get a little bit more scraping of the skin, so that the abrasion collar is greater on one side as opposed to the other side. But the hole is still essentially the diameter of the bullet. And this is buttressed by the fact that in many straight-on shots, nose-on shots by bullets in skin, often the bullet hole is smaller than the full diameter of the bullet, because the skin is opened by the nose, which is smaller than the diameter of the bullet, and the skin stretches, and the hole doesn't get any bigger. So the hole doesn't get as big as the diameter of the bullet, but gets as big as the slope where the nose is. So you can't get an elongated wound like that from an off-center shot through skin. You can in the skull, because that's what happened in the skull. The skull wound is the same diameter, 15 by 7.
Well, in addition to that, even more than that, Lucian Haig, he performed tests where he suited a gelatin block with a suit coat and shot it at a 27-degree angle, exactly 27 degrees. And it made round holes.
Yeah,
it was not. Yeah, the holes were not elliptical; they're exactly round.
See, if the bullet's traveling along the longitudinal axis vector as it would from a gun, there's no force to the side, so it's going to go along the direction of the hole. And so, if the hole is made by the nose, then the wound is going to be maybe slightly more bigger than the diameter of the bullet, but it won't be elongated that way. It can't be. It's impossible. And if you go through skull, because I argued with people about this. What's that redheaded woman's name? Who Millicent Cantor. She argued, well, the head wound is 15/7. How come that wasn't spinning? I said, well, you hit off angle and in bone. You've got hard. You don't have anything that stretches here. What you have is you have a hard surface material in which the force is transmitted along the side, because you don't get an abrasion collar. You get force that breaks the skin, breaks the bone as it's leaning against it. And so the physics of it is different for bone than it is for skin. Nobody talks about this. And so, I mean, the whole enterprise of this off-center shot that Shaw introduced simply is false. It just can't be.
Okay, look, we've talked about this for an hour, so I'd like to just go around and if anybody has some parting comments before we end the evening, let's start off with Scott.
Okay. I was really worried that I wouldn't be able to add much to this conversation because this panel is so distinguished and everybody here is so knowledgeable. Well, I mean, I'm more of a generalist when it comes to the JFK assassination. I try to cover all the bases. One of the things that keeps recurring with me in my discussions about the single bullet theory is so much emphasis gets put on whether or not the projectile fully transited Kennedy's body. People try to argue about like we were discussing earlier, the positions of the holes in the clothing, the position of the entry wound on Kennedy's back, whether it was high enough to allow for the single bullet theory. But I think one of the things that gets overlooked in that is a lot of I don't know if you can call it the blame for the single bullet theory gets put on Arlen Specter, who articulated it for the Warren Commission. Arlen Specter is not the originator of the single bullet theory, in my opinion. In my opinion, it was Dr. Boswell, who, in his autopsy report less than 48 hours after the assassination, writes that a single projectile fully transited President Kennedy's body. I mean, that's really where the single bullet theory began, in my opinion.
Yeah, they
And
tracked it.
just,
Yeah, they tracked the
yeah,
wound. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, well, at first they didn't think it had fully transited his body, so they did full body X-rays, and they couldn't find any projectile inside of him still. And it was only the next morning when he talked to the doctors at Parkland on the phone that they told him no, he had that wound on his neck in the front when he came in. That's when it clicked in his head and he realized this projectile must have fully transited his body in order to allow for that. So I think there's a lot of misunderstanding. There's this notion that Arlen Specter just kind of made it up to fit the preferred conclusion of the Warren Commission, but really he was just going off the data he had available to him. And like we were discussing earlier about exactly replicating this shot, you're never going to do that. It's like Nick was saying, to exactly replicate the single bullet projectile, it'd kind of be like exactly replicating a hurricane, You're never going to get two things that are exactly identical in every way and in every respect. Not only does CE399 show damage, it shows the exact right damage in the exact right places
Yep.
that would be
Exactly.
necessary for the single bullet theory to be the actual explanation. And something else to consider, it's like, okay, let's, for the sake of argument, discard the single bullet theory. So what is the explanation then? I think any explanation, a good explanation is one that leaves the fewest questions unanswered, and that hands down has to be the single bullet theory. Because if we reject it, we have to make all kinds of key assumptions. We have to assume things happen that we have no proof of. We have to assume that there's other projectiles that just somehow disappeared and we never recovered. So I think when you get down to it, the single bullet theory is the only working explanation for these events that has ever actually been produced. There's never been some like alternative that we could potentially accept.
And that does speak to the fact that conspiracy theorists never like to actually tell us what happened.
Mhm.
All they can do is snipe at the Warren Commission or the HSCA, but they'll never come up with some sort of theory because they can't, they have so much evidence that was planted, faked. They can never explain everything. They have no narrative.
Well, in all the time I've spent discussing the JFK assassination, if you were to ask a conspiracy theorist what evidence in this case has been planted or faked, it's pretty much all of it. Like all of it. You name the piece of evidence, I guarantee you there's somebody out there claiming that that evidence is faked. And of course, they don't want to take on the burden of advancing an explanation because that would put the scrutiny on them as opposed to them being the one doing the scrutinizing, right?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, Fred, any last comments?
Yes. I think people should become familiar with some of the physical concepts involving retardation force and velocities and how much actual velocity is required to break a bone and how much velocity would break a bullet. And also the densities of the materials the bullet is coming in contact with. But when the bullet exited Kennedy's throat, it impacted Connolly's back at about 1,830 feet per second. When it hit his back, it hit the lat muscle, which is like one of the strongest muscles in your body. So it was reduced at that point as well. So by the time it comminuted his rib, it's even losing more speed. So by the time the initial impact to Connolly's back, that bullet was done being susceptible to being damaged itself. Like that was the last damage it was going to get by hitting Connolly's back. Now, it was weaker when it hit the wrist. So whatever weakened piece was there could have broken off. But it was not going to be damaged any further after it impacted Connolly's back because that was the last point that it had enough velocity and that it hit something with enough density for itself to be damaged. After that, I don't care how many more wounds it caused, it's going to do it because it's a bullet and it's, I think, I forget how more dense it is than flesh, but it's going to, and bone, I think it's 4 times as dense as bone, maybe 2. I may be incorrect about that, but its structure is going to hold up against bone for a lot longer than the bone structure is going to hold up during that path that the bullet is moving. So to make it simple, once the bullet hit Connolly's back, it was done being damaged at that point, but yet still there's enough kinetic energy in that bullet to break bones. And my final thing I would like to encourage people to also to look at some of the peer review research on these concepts, like Lucian and Michael Haig, they've done several peer review studies that you can look in the Association for Firearms and Toolmark examiners. They publish stuff. You don't even have to look at the JFK stuff. You can look at other research papers from that journal. It's just packed with information, and you can get an idea of how these things actually work. I would also like to encourage people to look at Larry Sturtevant's book, John Latimer's book. Just listen to their testimony to the HSCA. The information is out there if you want it. The problem is people don't want it. I mean, I think some people would rather remain willfully ignorant to these things because once you start explaining something that they don't want to be true, then they're not going to listen anymore. So you actually have to have a desire to know what's going on or know how these kind of things work.
Very true. Nick?
So I'm happy to be on the panel tonight, and everybody here is very, very knowledgeable in the case, which is impressive to me. As Scott said, a general knowledge of the case, and that's impressive. I come with less of that. I'm just a scientist who finds this case of interest. I was interested in it as a child, and still am, and I've just found that the case miraculously provides lovely, beautiful, even though it's not beautiful what happened, but applications of classical mechanics, classical science. So that's sort of my what kind of keeps me glued to this. What Scott said is correct. I like to think of science as the endeavor of science is that you're looking for the best possible explanation that explains everything about an event or phenomenon from an infinity of counter explanations that are inferior. You can come up with every sort of explanation for what happened in Dealey Plaza. It could have been a UFO with a heat ray that was designed to mimic the effects of a firearm in the late 20th century. And prove me wrong. I mean, I can be very creative with this type of stuff, and I could say, prove me wrong about that. And you can't because it is an explanation from the infinity of explanations, but it's ludicrous because it has too many moving parts. It doesn't adhere to Occam's razor and it has no evidence to support it. So that's sort of my take on this. Then I'm going to kind of leverage off of what FJ was talking about, and that is the fact of the details behind the single bullet theory. I have no problem calling it single bullet theory. Dale Myers calls it single bullet fact, and I think it is a fact, but I think it's also a theory. It's a scientific theory. And it's the best one that explains it. And I'm not aware of any others that can really explain everything that happened, including the evidence itself, the bullet condition. It just turns out that you can look at the problem in a simple physics way with a whiteboard, and the distance that the bullet was fired, it went through some air drag, it slowed down a little bit before it hit Kennedy in the neck, and by the time it was done, it was about a meter. So basically, it went from its impact speed to 0 in the course of a meter. So that's what you call a slowdown over a distance. So it's much like that's what an airbag does, right? So people think, well, what does an airbag do in a car? An airbag, all that's doing is it's rather than you stopping very sudden in an instant, it's creating this sort of distance that you stop, which produces less G-forces on your body, which creates less damage. And you can do a back of the envelope calculation for 1 meter slowdown for the impact speed of the Carcano bullet, a 1 meter slowdown from that impact speed to 0, and you'll find that the yields, the pressure, the pressure on the bullet nose is much less, probably about, say, at least 3 times less, maybe more, than the yield strength of a copper jacket. So the bottom line is those specific circumstances mean that you're going to end up with a bullet that's not going to be that damaged, and that's what they found in that's the evidence that was found in the hospital, that fits perfect. It fits things pretty well, as Fred says. So and that's just some thoughts I have on the single bullet theory, and so yeah, was happy to talk about this tonight.
Well, thank you. And let's conclude with Dr. Martin Kelly.
Well, I learned a lot here, particularly from 2 people I have not interacted with before, Scott and Fred. And, I'm interested in this because I'm interested in causal arguments, and the single bullet analysis is, in fact, a long drawn out causal argument. That is, there's enough science in here that has to be true to make the whole enterprise true. For example, the bullet went through into Kennedy's upper back, lower neck, and it went in nose first. If that happened, then of course it was going a pretty large velocity because it wasn't yawed or tumbling. So it must have gone through his body just on those grounds alone. We look at the autopsy and it was tracked, nick in the pleura, bruise on the lung, strap muscles, thorax, et cetera, et cetera. So the bullet went through, and depending on whose testimony you read, if you read Ebersol's testimony at HSCA, he claimed they did it that night. They tracked it that night and they were showing it. In any case, they tracked it, and the conspiracy theory people have been yelling for years, the bullet wasn't tracked, okay? It was tracked. I mean, I don't know why they say that. And it's also true, as Scott said, the condition of the bullet is in fact a confirmation of what Dr. Shaw had testified to, that the bullet went through there and went through and hit the fifth rib sideways because it took out 4 inches of it, and it didn't hit it nose on, and that the condition of the bullet, which is crimped a little bit at the back half of it, is perfectly consistent with the bullet going and hitting something sideways. Dr. Gregory testifies that the bullet went into the wrist backwards. Otherwise, the fibers from the shirt jacket wouldn't be in the wrist. And there we go. And we know how slowly it was going. And so we have the Zapruder film. We have the elbows. All of these things, when you put them together, each one of these nodes has a very strong empirical causality to it. That is, stated as a truth, the truth is a necessary truth because it depends on certain kinds of scientific concepts. When you pinch a nerve, you get a reaction, okay? When you shoot a bullet through something, it makes a reaction, etc. These things are true. They have to be true. So the idea that this is a very, very seat-of-the-pants enterprise, this theory, this is why I object to calling it a theory, because I think it's not a theory. It's a hypothesis, which is confirmed. You know, it's not a theory per se because you don't derive anything from it. Okay, you see what is implied by it. So I think the fact that nobody understands this other than people who believe that Kennedy was not shot by a conspiracy is a bad sign for the public IQ in general. You know, that nobody can follow this argument.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. It was a great panel. Hopefully we can reconvene in a couple of weeks and talk about something else. But thank you very much for attending.
Nice.
Thanks for doing this, Fred.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Ciao.